Hi there, folks, and welcome to NTI's Japan Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Zivna Kajimam again. Thank you so much for joining us today. Pleasure to have you with us as always. Hope you're staying safe and dry. It's a rainy season here in Japan, which unfortunately comes with its annual share of floods and mudslides and sadly loss of life and property. We've already had some communities here in southwestern Japan, about 2 hours south of Fukuoka City where we are. So in Kumamoto Prefecture, people have been devastated already by these seasonal downpours over the last few days. So 35 people confirmed dead, and as much as I hope otherwise, this is probably not the last we'll hear of the death toll. So if you are here in Japan, stay safe, watch your phones for prefectural government notices of evacuation, if any, and make sure to have your emergency evacuation kit handy. Hopefully you won't have to use it, but better safe than sorry. Now, for today's episode, and particularly in light of this annual wet season, we've had a special guest join us for a nice and long chat about Japanese homes, mainly houses, mainly wooden structures. There are plenty of theories out there about the reasons why Japanese homes are built of such light and short-lived materials like wood and light steel frames, as opposed to bricks, mortar, concrete, which are in use, particularly for larger condo blocks and commercial buildings, but are far from the norm for smaller houses and multifamily blocks. Now, I've had my own ideas about why this is the case, as do most people who aren't in the know, and apparently our ideas are very wrong. So it was great to finally have this so-called mystery explained in explicit detail. And who better to explain this than a home designer, architect, and carpenter, and a foreigner at that. Now, she's very quick to proclaim that she's not a certified architect, even though when you listen to her speak and check out the links in the show notes, you will probably share my view that she puts many licensed and certified architects to shame. But I'll let you draw your own conclusions. So here we go. Without further ado, our conversation with Anne Kohtz, designer, carpenter, and builder extraordinaire. Enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so with us on the line from Tsukuba in Ibaraki, which to those of you who are not familiar with, is a lovely little city about an hour northeast of Tokyo, and it's actually pretty well known as a science and technology hub. So with us from there is Anne Kohtz, who's originally from Idaho in the States, and she started out as a trainee architect and then ended up in Japan as an impromptu architect, home designer, carpenter of sorts. And finally, as a baker, which is what she's spending most of her time on these days, although she still does a fair bit of renovating and design work. But I'd better let her tell her own story in her own words. She does it so much better than I can. So, Anne, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Ziv. Thanks for the intro. Of course, I'm delighted to talk about Japanese architecture and vernacular design. I just, to let you know what vernacular design is, that's basically the design that has developed in a country or a region over a period of hundreds or even thousands of years. And so that's, for example, in Iraq or Iran, that's where they have these great stack ventilation systems that cool the houses, or, you know, the adobe construction in the Navajo Nation. That kind of thing, that's vernacular design. And that's actually something I'm really passionate about and love to talk about it. There's been a lot written on Japanese vernacular, but I really think there's still more to say, particularly in light of modern research on passive architecture and air quality, and also net zero energy construction.
Okay, but hang on. So before we get right into all of that, and the other good stuff that really is what our listeners are here for, can you maybe first give us a bit of your origin story? So, like, what brought you here to Japan in the first place? How did you end up here, all of that?
Okay, yeah, well, that's kind of a long story, but I'll try and condense it. I grew up in Idaho, as you said, on a potato farm. Interestingly enough, everybody knows about Idaho potatoes, and that's true. So, but then I went to the university in Oregon, and after I studied abroad in Germany, then my university in Oregon had a sister university in Japan. So after I graduated, I went to try teaching English in Tokyo, and that was just at the end of the bubble. It was 1993. So I've just outed myself. But anyway, I spent 2 years teaching at a private language school where I met a lovely Japanese gentleman. And then both of us actually found grad school programs in the U.S. At the University of Oregon. I went to study architecture, and then he studied neural networks, cognitive neuroscience kind of things.
Oh, wow.
don't even ask me about that. It's really technical. He's a real science kind of guy. So, and then we both, after we graduated, then we both worked in the U.S. for a while. But back then, there was this first tech bubble. I don't know if you remember. I'm probably too young, but anyway, he had a pretty sweet gig at a software company, but the company went belly up. So eventually we decided to move to Japan again. So then we moved back to Japan, sold our house in Portland and everything, moved back to Japan. But I didn't really speak much Japanese then. So it really, really didn't work out to get a job as an intern architect. So that was kind of a little bit of a bummer. But I did a whole kinds of stuff. I taught English. I edited for scientific papers. I even taught pie baking, which so it's one of the benefits of growing up on a farm. You learn how to bake pies. But around the time I was probably probably 30-ish, I discovered that I was severely gluten intolerant, and back then that was really pretty much unknown. But it really kind of changed my life a lot. So, but anyway, that's something that probably we'll mention later. So anyway, my husband and I finally, we had a daughter, and then we finally escaped from Tokyo. Thank goodness. I mean, you probably live in Tokyo, but, Tokyo's nice, but thank goodness anyway. So we moved to lovely Tsukuba, which I think it's really great out here. And I joined the Architecture Society and made lots of good friends. But then the Great Hanshin earthquake happened. And that's really what pushed me back into architecture, because after the earthquake, because of my Architecture Society friends, I got to hear about this little beautiful tea house that was out in the countryside, and it was near the Mount Tsukuba. And it had been damaged in the earthquake, and the owners were going to just pull it down and throw it away. And, a friend and I went and looked at it, and it was really, really pretty. And, it obviously had some serious problems, but because of the nature of Japanese architecture, you can actually take things apart. The traditional joinery can actually be taken apart, like Lincoln logs. And so my friend and I decided to salvage it. And so we did. We took it apart, and we got some scuba dive students to help us. And then the person who really helped the most was a friend of another architecture friend, Eiji Tsushima. And man, that guy, I'm telling you what, he's just an amazing guy. He's a preservationist. He's an autodidact. He's just a total Renaissance guy. And he has a design build firm here in Tsukuba, and specializing in traditional construction practices using modern technology and methods. So he basically volunteered his time to help us. Crazy gaijin looking to take down this tea house, and he's so he really made everything happen and helped us do that. And so we did take that down, and we stored it. It eventually did not end up being rebuilt, although some of the parts of it were reused. So that was, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I guess. Not great, but not terrible. Anyway, it was really great in one way, which was that Tsushima-san was impressed by my farmer girl ability to swing a hammer. So after a while, I convinced him to hire me as a designer in his firm. So it was really great. It was I really have to say it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. But I was definitely in for an eye-opener working there. That was something else.
Right. So you start working there, and you're surrounded by all these gruff, cranky old Japanese carpenters. I'm guessing cranky and old, right? Like mostly middle-aged or elderly men, or men definitely. What was that like?
Oh man, you're totally right about big, rough old Japanese carpenters. I'm telling you what, those guys, they're the sweetest guys in the world. But honestly, the construction industry as a whole in Japan is an exclusive game for men only. It's kind of funny, but since I'm a Westerner, I kind of get a pass for being female.
Gaijin pass, right?
Yeah, as a gaijin and I'm white, so those guys, they didn't really know what to expect from me. So, I sort of just got I got to do what comes naturally to me. And like I said, I'm a farm girl, so I'm perfectly happy to crawl around in a sweaty, soot-filled attic space. I mean, it's better than mucking out the barn. Anyway, so, I'm crawling around on the top of these beams up in the, 12 or 15 feet off the floor, taking measurements and drawing plans or cleaning those same soot-encrusted beams. I'm telling you, that's a fun job. But, there's just so many things that go into renovating or restoring an old traditional style minka or farmhouse. So I did all kinds of stuff. I mean, I was drawing the plans, but I was also, sometimes running a jackhammer or, mixing and pouring cement or puttying and, prettifying the old beams and things or sanding and painting. I mean, you name it, I probably did it. So, and that's really what works with those old cranky architects and carpenters. I mean, that's what they really, they just really like somebody that can just pick up a tool and use it and doesn't have to be, told everything to do. So that's a really good thing. I mean, I was asked to serve tweet tea.
No.
Twice, that's all. After that, the word kind of got around, and so I didn't really get asked to do that again. If it's my client, then yeah, I'd serve tea, but I don't serve tea just because a woman ought to do it, So.
Yeah.
And nobody ever actually dared to ask me to make a photocopy.
Or fax, right?
Or fax. Oh yeah, seriously, those guys all use faxes. So, but anyway, the biggest thing that I found was that I just had to learn the language, and that's something that's still just absolutely daunting because, you think you're pretty fluent in Japanese. You get all cocky about your Japanese and your accent and stuff until you have to explain your plans to a 7-year-old Ibaraki-ben speaker who has no teeth. I mean, seriously, those guys they're so hard to understand, Sometimes I actually had to get somebody to translate for me, from Japanese to Japanese.
From Japanese to Japanese.
Yes. Because Ibaraki-ben, it's really funny. Ibaraki-ben is it's so interesting because they lose vowels. There's in Japanese, in typical Tokyo Japanese, there's a, I, u, e, o.
Yeah.
But in Ibaraki, they say a, I, e, e. They lose like 2 vowels. It's like, what happened? So I mean, instead of saying iro enpitsu, they say iro inpitsu.
Ah.
Yeah, so it's like really hard to understand. And then, and then a person that has no teeth left, it's like, wow, So and then, and then they would like to have a little bit of fun with me. So, sometimes they'd be like, they knew very well that I had no idea what the Yonsun Gakutsuta or is, what part of the wood is the Keshomen. I had no, they knew I didn't know that.
Well, everybody knows that.
Yeah, right. So, but they'd have a little fun with me sometimes with that. So, and also another thing that just was hysterically, it was both really daunting. You have to be able to translate between shaku and sun measurements and centimeters. And I grew up with inches, so there's 2 translations right there.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, I mean, it just really, first of all, Americans can go jump in a lake for you still using inches. I think that's stupid. But anyway, I'm an American, so I get to say that. But anyway, so the shaku and sun thing, it just was really, really, really confusing at first, and then you have to just know all the conversions off the top of your head. Because,
hopefully none of those measuring mistakes actually went to production, right? You would have picked them up before you actually start banging the wood together, right?
Oh yeah. But it is an issue because you just have to keep it straight, and for me the biggest issue was that in a foot and a shaku are almost the same thing, right? But a foot is divided into 6 and shaku is divided into 12, and a shaku is divided into 10. So half a foot is 6 inches, but half a shaku is 5 sun. So, I just I couldn't get it through my head that people would be like hanjaku, hanjaku, and I'd be writing a 6, So it was that was a little bit dangerous. But yeah, nothing, no big problems happened because of that. It was just mostly my time that was taken up. So, yeah. But anyway, back to Kenshiku Kobo-yu. I started working over there. And those guys, they're really incredible. And it's not just the carpenters. The tile guys and the roofers and the plasterers and all those traditional tradespeople are just amazing. I mean, like the plasters, they train with a tub of water. And they they fill the tub of water completely up to the rim. And then they have to practice running their trowel over it without spilling any water. So they have to get the bottom of the trowel wet and slide it across the surface of the water and not spill any over the edge.
That's like martial arts training, isn't it?
It really is. It's just really surprising, and it's just really amazing. And here's the other thing, that this illustration I think is the most striking to an architect who was trained in the U.S. In a 2x4 house in the U.S., when you frame a window in, you have to factor at least an inch of shim space. That's the open space around the window. So you have to have like an extra inch of space on all sides of where the window is going to fit, because the frame is never going to be true. So, you just have to factor that in. So you make the space for the window bigger than what the window is designed to be. And then when they put it in, they shim it up. They put these little supports in, and they shim it up so it's straight and true. And then when they finish out the house, then they put trim pieces on it to cover up the opening. And then they also put insulation in there, and they cover everything up. So there's all these trim pieces all over everything, and those are to basically cover up the holes, cover up the spaces. And I tell you what, I was never more shocked. The first house I worked on, I designed the window space, and then I tried to design the frame bigger to have a shim space. And the guys were like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm putting in a shim space." And they're like, "What's that for?" I'm like, "Well, that's a shim space." And so what happened was they framed the window to the exact bloody dimensions of the built window.
Really? Not a millimeter apart?
Nothing.
Wow.
No. And then, so these were wooden windows in that house. And then the window maker came in, and he just slid the window exactly into place.
That's amazing.
It was. I was so shocked. And I just couldn't, at first I couldn't believe it. And then I was like, well, and so the next thing you do in an American construction is you have to caulk around the window, right? And they're like, and I'm like, aren't we going to caulk? And they're like, what are we going to caulk? And I'm like, around the window. And they're like, why would we do that? And so turns out that in a traditional Japanese wooden house, basically the humidity will expand the wood and seal it.
Oh.
So it seals the wood of the window to the frame. So there's no need for caulking. And I'm just like, yeah. So that's just absolutely, that was just absolutely stunning for me. But anyway, but that humidity thing, that's another huge thing. I went to UVO specifically because they have a really good environmental program, and I'm very interested in environmental architecture, sustainable architecture. So UVO has a real strong emphasis on passive design and designing to suit the climate you're in. And that's really, especially, I don't know if you know about, the Bauhaus movement and the industrial sort of international design. But that's sort of this aesthetic of having, really clean lines and flat roofs and, this international design aesthetic that everybody likes. And, initially a lot of people thought, Japanese architecture really fits into that because of the the clean lines of an interior in a Japanese building.
Yep.
But the problem is that, of course, a flat roof doesn't work well in a rainy climate. You've got to basically cover that with some really serious materials, and it's not a mechanical solution. You have to bring a chemical solution along. You basically have to tar it and glue everything down so that your flat roof doesn't leak. So that it just doesn't work very well in a rainy climate. And of course, in a northern German townhouse, you don't have a lot of light in the winter.
Yeah.
So you don't want to have big heavy eaves or anything, because all you're doing is just reducing your light.
You want the light, yeah.
Yeah. But in a Japanese building, you really want to protect from that blazing, sweltering Japanese summer sun.
Yeah.
So so that's this vernacular architecture thing. And so back to the humidity thing. That what I really didn't understand was that humidity is really the primary driver of Japan's vernacular style. Literally everything about a traditional Japanese house is designed to mitigate not heat, as is usually assumed. I mean, everybody's like, oh, Japanese houses are designed for summer. That's not the point. The mold is the point.
Ah.
So, because right now, you can surely feel it. I mean, it's right now rainy season, and relative humidity in my house has been around 90% the past couple of days.
Yeah, here too.
So, so Japanese vernacular architecture basically relies on ventilation and shade. So traditional houses have really deep eaves, particularly on the south side, and then they typically really use the stack effect. So what that is basically the stack effect means that you have hot air rising, right? That's a physics thing. Hot air just rises.
Yep.
And so what you get is then you have the Engawa, which is on the south, and that provides a buffer space in the summer. And then, of course, in the winter, it also provides a sunroom space. And then there's almost always these transom Dhamma windows that are above that. That are on the upper end of the wall, or the upper side of the wall. And then on the north side of the house, then you have these low floor-level windows that are called jimado. So when you open up those jimado on the north side of the house, then you draw cool air up through the rooms, and it exits through the hot south side of the house. So this is just a really, really simple stack effect that really works to cool down traditional houses and also to ventilate them. So that really helps to prevent that mold building.
Yep.
So, and this is a really, really, really great thing. And 2,000 years of Japanese construction have really come up with some really elegant solutions like that. But the problem is just the winter, because you get in a traditional house and in the summer it's just all wonderful, but then in the winter it's
freezing cold.
Freezing cold. And you're like, well, why have Japanese houses over the last 2,000 years, why aren't they warm? Why haven't they insulated them so that they'll be warm in the winter? Well, that's because that humidity thing will just, you'll just get epic mold even in the winter if you close up the rooms.
Right.
So basically, traditional air design in a Japanese house is to move it up through the floor, so your tatami doesn't have anything underneath it, right? So the air is moving up through the tatami and up through gaps in the walls and the roof. And that's just the Japanese houses are just built to be air loose. And
so that is on purpose. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely on purpose. So, in the coldest months, what you were traditionally expected to do was close your shoji to make your little small box room in the middle of your house, and then huddle around your heated table, your kotatsu.
Yeah.
can be really, really great, but then the kitchen is miserable. So,
oh yeah.
But I don't know if you've ever used a kotatsu. It's
I do. I love it. So are you saying that aircon, because aircon would dry up the air as well, so wouldn't the aircon help with the humidity?
Well, now, yes. I mean, this is what I'm talking about is a passive building.
Yep.
So this is a completely passive building. But the problem with mechanical air conditioning and with mechanical circulation is that you can't miss anything. So if you have mechanical circulation and then you have, for example, a coat closet, you better air that thing out regularly because it's going to mold in there.
Yeah.
And this is one of the problems that Japanese construction has with the 30-year houses that are built. They're not properly ventilated, and so they don't last very long. They really only last 30 years, and then they start to mold and rot, and it's pretty nasty. So, but the thing is that if you have a closed, insulated house, you can ventilate everything and make it work. But I tell you what, I have renovated newer houses. I renovated one 3 or 4 years ago that it was built, I think it was about 10, 15 years old, and it was very, very heavily insulated, and they also were using wood stoves, which really, really dries out a house. So they were using these wood stoves. It was very heavily insulated, and it was a sort of a Western-style house. And everything was fine until we opened up the cabinets under the sinks, and it just was so moldy. And even with insulated pipes, it was really, really moldy. So that's the thing. You just have to, there's always going to be this trade-off. So, but the other point about Japanese vernacular architecture, I think that's really, really important, is that in a traditional house, they used natural materials in their natural state, and they also used softwood. And so what that means is that they used pine and cedar and these kinds of very aromatic softwoods. And the good thing about those is, number one, indigenous wood is not very attractive to termites, because the wood in Japan, the trees in Japan have spent the last million years or so developing, basically having a war with termites, and they're at somewhat of an impasse. But anyway, it's kind of a little bit of a side note here, but I have sometimes seen imported softwoods like American pine, and you've seen termites in the house, and the termites will climb up the sugi, the Japanese cedar column, to get to the pine beams.
They love it that much.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Because it's like, wow, this stuff is really tasty.
Exotic.
Get away from that stupid sugi stuff. So that's an interesting thing. But anyway, the point of using softwoods is that the softwood absorbs moisture, and it also then emits moisture in the dry periods. So during this season, if you touch a column that's made of sugi or the hinoki or pine or something like that, if you touch those softwood columns, it won't feel damp. And you should just try it. I mean, I'm sure you're living in a place, or you're probably in a place that has like vinyl wall coverings or something like that. And if you just touch it, it feels damp,
Yeah, it
and
does.
the flooring feels damp. So one of the things that really improves comfort in a traditional house is to have just oiled softwood flooring, and just absolutely the rest of the surfaces are untreated so that they absorb the humidity. And that's just, in the summer, it feels drier. So it's the same with the natural plaster. It always feels drier because it's always absorbing that extra moisture from the air. And then in winter, it feels warmer because it's not an impermeable membrane.
Right.
So that the air quality issue is a huge thing. Vinyl and painted surfaces can really, really lower the air quality in a house. I definitely go for using the natural materials.
Yeah.
But anyway, some years of Japanese vernacular construction and then applying modern technology to the mix, because is that you can build beautiful passive houses that are cool in the this. So it's a great challenge, though.
This is fascinating, and I mean that's really how I find you too, right? Like you were talking about, your expertise was phenomenal, and some of the stuff that you're talking about was fascinating from strictly financial basis, and condo units mostly and stuff like that. So I was always of the opinion built light and from less durable materials like wood and not from stone and brick, etc., just for financial reasons, right? Because the builders assume this is the case, but apparently there is a lot more to that, isn't there?
Oh yeah, there's a ton more. That housemaker typology is pretty much a standard for new construction. That is basically a product of the Japanese reason for a normal person to build a 30 to 40 year house. It's just a good decision for a homeowner to build that kind of a house in general. But at first, the house builders wanted to get a whole bunch of housing stock up, poor construction methods, because there was just this huge need for housing. Any housing was that, they could keep doing that. They could keep building this old. And part of the reason that they were able to do that is, and people wanted to have a modern, to convince people that they should rebuild their house every 20 or 30 years, right? Bad for the middle class. But aside from that, that's sort of a different political discussion. And I know that recently the government has been really trying to push the housemakers to extend that building lifespan. And so I think 4 or 5 years ago, the government basically mandated that house builders should shoot for 42-year houses instead of 30-year houses. And I'm sure you know a lot about that, but anyway, there was a big recommendation for that. But in terms of wood, there's plenty of buildings in Japan that have lasted 1,000 years that are built of wood. So it's not something that's used just because it's cheap. Or because it's easy to use. Really, aside from the air quality things that I mentioned before, there's also a serious concern about typhoons and earthquakes that was really, really elegantly addressed by wood construction in the vernacular. So, if you were just talking about typhoons, you'd really want to build stone bunkers. Like you say, your brick and stone, that's really heavy, and so if you just had a climate where there was nothing but typhoons, then that would be a really, really good construction solution. But what you also have here is earthquakes, and so you want both a heavy roof, but then you also want a flexible structure, because the great thing about a wooden post and beam system is that the joints can be flexible. So a lot of the lateral energy can be taken up in the flexing of the joints during an earthquake.
Right.
This is not, so if this were not attached to a foundation. So since they weren't attached, a good thing, because that means that lateral energy is actually not making the house fall down. So that's something that's really, really important about the wood construction. Anyway, that's how you can effectively support your heavy typhoon-resistant roof with relatively thin beams and columns in a regular grid.
And all of those motifs that you just mentioned, is that what features in your work as well? So are you a traditional Japanese kind of designer, or is your work more modern or Western or a mix, or what is it?
Well, yeah, actually, definitely it's a mix. I'm pretty much a fusion designer, which is, it's really what my clients expect anyway, just looking at me, So, but I'm actually not really interested in building museum pieces that nobody wants to live in, like, Japanese, just slavishly following Japanese traditional architecture. I'm not interested in that at all. For one thing, traditional construction's bloody cold in the winter, and I'm personally too old for that. So, You can just keep your 12-layer kimonos and actually, as much as I love kotatsus, I don't like being tied down to one.
Yeah.
But that isn't to say that I'm all in on central heating and net zero housing, because I just don't think that's the best or most environmentally appropriate solution in this climate. I think that moderate and targeted removable insulation, you can sort of think about what traditional houses do with amado shutters on the outside of the house, and pair that with all of the passive cooling solutions, and then add in, for example, high performance thermal mass stoves for the winter heat. I think that's definitely more the way to go. But to maintain that excellent ventilation, and natural ventilation, without the mechanical ventilation, so that you don't have mold problems in this really, really, really damp season. But that's actually a pretty massive topic, and I am definitely interested in writing a book about that when I have time.
That should be a good one.
My current remodel.
Well, the remodeling, the results of your work are gorgeous. We'll link to some of Anne's projects in this episode's show notes, so be sure to check them out. It's really stunning work. Okay, and then speaking of influence and change and all of that, you've gone through another major shift in the last couple of years, haven't you? You're now actually a baker, I think? How did that one come about?
Okay, well, that's another long story. But as I mentioned before, I'm very, very gluten intolerant. And when I found out about that when I was in my early 30s, I was pretty bummed out because, if you're gluten intolerant, especially in Japan, it's just really, really, really hard to eat out. I just get massive intestinal problems and skin rashes. I mean, it's the whole 9 yard when I get gluten. So for a long time, I have really had, I sort of had my eye on whether a cafe or a bakery could be open with gluten-free options. But anyway, so how'd that happen is, I left my lovely job working for Tsushima-san at Kenchiku Koboyu in 2017. I really love those guys, but for various reasons, I just needed to move on. And I got a job at a pretty upscale firm in Tokyo at that time. But, the money was really good and the work was interesting, but the commute was like 5 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I mean, it was, you can do a certain amount of work on the train, but long term, it just was unsustainable for my health and sanity and my family life. So my family really wanted me to stop doing that. So, but I didn't really have enough of a reputation to be able to make a living wage just as an independent practitioner. So, and also I didn't want to work for another firm that wasn't as great as Kenchiku Koboyu. So, things sort of just came together at that point. I saw that gluten-free food and understanding of gluten intolerance has really gained prominence in Japan in the last 2 or 3 years. I'm not really sure why it suddenly has become trendy in Japan, but with the Olympics coming up, it just really seemed like a good business chance for me. And then, we sort of talked about that and threw ideas back and forth. And then one of my good friends from Kenchiku Koboyu decided to retire. And he had the idea of partnering a community development NPO with my bakery here in our little village in Oda. And one thing led to another, and pretty soon, I'm designing my kitchen and applying for business loans and grants and exploring marketing, and it became real. And so then I thought, well, obviously starting a business takes an extreme amount of time and effort. So I really expected that I put my design work on hold for at least a year. But lucky for me, I guess, I've been asked to do some consulting work anyway, which of course I couldn't resist. But I really made it clear to my family and stuff that I'm not abandoning architecture to open the bakery. So once I get the company on its feet, I really hope to spend at least part of my time on design and community development projects. So, but speaking of designing that kitchen, this was also something about, fusion architecture. I sort of feel like I have a pretty different perspective on what a kitchen should be than many Japanese might have. Yep. Like I said, this is the first commercial kitchen I've ever designed, so I visited as many small bakeries as I could, and I just found that, wow, the defining feature of a small production environment in Japan tends to be pretty much grimness. They tend to be cramped and dim and uncomfortable and kind of grimy. So so my fusion sensibilities came out, and so my design is definitely something that an American would probably appreciate a lot more. It's bright, it's pleasant, it's easy to clean, it has natural wood in it, the windows and some of the fittings, and but it's also built with Japanese traditional carpentry techniques, and with, of course, non-toxic natural materials. So.
It's gorgeous too. It's really inspiring. I mean, I'm not much of a cook, but I'd love to cook in a kitchen like that. So you should be very proud of it. And folks, again, if any of you are looking for a designer or a renovator, again, we highly recommend Anne. Check out her work. I've got a feeling, especially for our English listeners, that it might be exactly what many of you are looking for in your homes or workspaces, but can't really find. Okay, so, Anne, just before we let you go, what's on your plate these days? What kind of work are you looking to take on, or what kind of balance are you trying to strike exactly? Where do you see yourself, I guess, in 5-10 years?
Well, thanks very much for the compliment. I do like this space, and I particularly love that it smells nice, even when I'm not baking anything, because I used Osmo stains and Lithos natural paints. And the other thing that I want to say is that, I really built it on a shoestring, and that's another thing that I want to do in the future, is do projects that are, I'm not really interested in building stuff for people who just want to showcase. I really am interested in building things for regular people to live in and to work in and to love. I want people to love the space that they come home to. So one of the things I'm working on right now is a small remodel project in Tokyo, and that's also it's right up my alley. It's a really, really tight space. It's just like, trying to maximize the space usage, sort of like a puzzle. So, but the other thing I'm interested in the future is that, I'm obviously renovating my own house right now, but I do live in a co-housing situation, my family and then another person, and we're really focused on expanding that co-housing idea. There are some really, really great projects for example, particularly in Portland, Oregon, where there are relatively old and established co-housing developments. And I'd really like to do something like that, maybe not quite as big and ambitious as some of those, but I think that co-housing is something really important that we can do to make ourselves more flexible for the climate change that's coming up, and also probably social changes that are coming up, especially because so many people have few children and their families are living more separately. So I love the idea of being able to share a really nice bath and garden areas and office spaces or gathering spaces while having my own private spaces, like my kitchen. I'm not really great on sharing a kitchen, but I really think community housing is a really great way to meet the challenges of the coming era of environmental and social changes. So, and the other thing I'm going to do is I'm definitely writing a book and interviewing my old boss, Tsushima-san, at Kenchiku Koboyu. That's something I've sort of been working off and on for a while.
That one I would love to hear. Those stories really get the imagination going.
Well, yeah, there's some really great stories.
That's great. So can't wait to see how things pan out for you. And it would also be great just to have you on the show once in a while, if you wouldn't mind, just to keep us updated on current trends, or showcase interesting projects that you've been involved in or that others have been involved in, and so forth. So thanks again for taking the time to speak with us today, Anne. It was great chatting with you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
So, there you have it. Eye-opening, wasn't it? I know I certainly enjoyed this conversation with Anne. Hope you did as well. And again, be sure to check out the show notes for some samples of her work, as well as her current new and expanded career as a baker. We'll also put in her contact details in case you want to chat her up regarding any potential design or building projects you may have had in mind. And of course, feel free to share this episode, as well as the podcast in general, with anyone else who may find this content interesting or useful in any way. And we would love it if you could leave us your comments, questions, or even just click on the review or rate button in the iTunes store and let us know what you think. Hope to have you with us again next time, and until then, stay safe, dry, and prepared, especially if you're in Japan during this wet season. Speak to you again soon, and until then, yoroshiku.